Hello, I'm Terry Olette. If you've seen the first video in this series, The ABCs of Stamping, you've already met Fran Seifert of Fun Stamps, or Stampendous. Today's video will teach you how to see and how to stamp. As you increase your skills of perception, your stamped artwork will take on a whole new dimension. Perhaps you have seen examples of this and how dramatically a person's drawing skills have improved when they learn how to use the intuitive or the right side of the brain. In this same way, an intuitive approach to stamping will help you discover your own imagination. As an artist, whether you paint, draw, or stamp, you want to create with your hands what you envision in your mind's eye. To do this, you need to have a good grasp of some elements of design. So let's begin with the artistic elements of stamping. Some of you might look at those blank papers and just not know where to begin. But by learning some basic design elements, you will gain confidence and soon be stamping like a pro. Fran, tell us about those basic design concepts.
Okay, the basic things would be line and shape, value, color, and then composition.
Okay.
And we'll go through and kind of describe what each of those mean and show a lot of examples. That's the best way to just kind of see.
Great, helps us understand better too. Great, what do you have first?
Okay, now the first two elements, line and shape, are something that the stamp artist doesn't have to worry about a whole lot because it's mostly determined by the stamps that you select. And we were talking earlier and we were comparing the two different styles.
Right.
This style of rose and leaf pattern are more of the line outline and like a line drawing.
Okay.
Okay. And whereas these others are more of a shape. It looks much darker overall, but it gives you a solid, bold area. And other designs may have a combination of both.
Oh, okay.
And so those are choices that you make in what stamps you select. And you really have that predetermined for you. And so the things that you can concentrate on as a stamper are what values you give it by the colors that you ink it, all of those choices, and then composition, how you combine all of the elements. So that'll make it a lot easier.
So we need to be aware of those when we're choosing stamps for our collection.
Yeah, and I think it'll make you more aware of some things.
Okay, great.
And I'll move these out of the way.
All right.
And what I've stamped here is a color chart that I think if I explain some relationships of colors, that'll help a little bit. And on values, values just mean the light or dark of a color. And a yellow would be a light value as compared to the purples or the darker colors down here. So the wheel helps us understand some relationships of different colors. And the most basic thing is that you have your primary colors. You have yellow and red and blue, and that triangle will remind you of the primary colors. And the colors that fall in between that, where these other lines indicate, will give you the orange, green, and purple. And let me show some examples of some of these things as we go along. It'll help them make sense.
Okay, good.
A lot of people, when they start stamping, may just use rainbow colors and use a little bit of everything they have. And that makes a very fun and colorful look to it. When we did this one earlier, we did a whole rainbow of colors in there.
Right.
And so the colors are nice and bright. But to try some different things, let's look at, if you were to limit yourself to certain color combinations, it would push you to try some very different things.
Right.
So here's one where I've only used the primary colors, and you can see how that gives an interesting look.
Well, it looks very bright and colorful too, with just
Yeah.
3 colors. It's amazing.
Yeah. Now if I add to the primaries the other secondary colors, this is where you're seeing the whole spectrum. And you've got orange and greens and everything on there all together. So this is one way to do it. And now we've combined a lot of different things. I'll point out on here that we've marked this range of colors would be considered warm colors, and the whole range over here would be considered your cool colors.
Okay.
And I explained a little bit about values being light and dark.
You did.
And so pastels would be your lighter colors. So we've done something like this before with the baby card, and you can see how that same balloon stamp looks very different with the different color selection.
Oh, I see. As compared to this one, where this one was with the primary colors.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So
All right, that
this
makes
will give
sense.
you a lot more mileage out of your stamps to
Right.
vary the color combinations.
And they
Here's
look
a couple
completely
other-
different. They look like 2 different stamps.
Yeah. So here's some other pastel things with the little tassels.
Oh,
And other times, if you stick to just one color, that's referred to as monochromatic. I did some samples here where I've got just greens or the different purple colors, and even this with just the magentas. I can get a very beautiful piece, and if I get tired of everything looking alike, I can switch to a little bit simpler approach with the monochromatic and still get a very beautiful example. And you start thinking a little bit more about your design and what you're doing with it
Right.
than just grabbing all the colors at once. So
That's beautiful.
another term that is called complementary means that colors are on the opposite end of the color chart. So that gives you a primary with a secondary color. And those two, by being the most contrast to each other, will give you some very nice examples. And on this one here, for example, we've got the orange and blue, and that gives us an interesting sort of a scenic look. Or on this one, if I limit myself to the red and green, I always think of Christmas, but you may have other things as well in those colors. And then this was a real fun one. I had really
wow.
never even thought of putting the yellow and purples together.
Right, I wouldn't
until
either.
I thought, let's do something for complementary, and then it was just kind of a fun thing that developed with the whole fan idea on
Oh,
here.
that is beautiful.
So one of the other things is the analogous colors. And again, don't worry about these words. A lot of it is just to suggest different combinations.
Right. We're
And
just
what
trying to
they're
give you
called doesn't
ideas.
matter. Yeah.
Right.
So analogous colors means that they're colors that appear side by side on the chart, like neighboring colors. And it could be any cluster or grouping of things that would give you an interesting card. So on these samples, this one, for example, is, just using some of the ones in this range.
Oh, yes, you're right. It just
very rich.
flows, doesn't it?
Colors. And you can mix this into this without getting muddied colors.
Right.
Because what happens quite often is that if you mix your warm and cool colors together with your markers right on the rubber, they begin to muddy up and you get brown colors and that. So to keep them fresh, you can kind of use the yellow as a transition sort of color between the warm and cool colors.
Okay.
And so this is another one where I worked with analogous colors within the color bands on each award on here.
Oh, yes, you can see
And-
right here. There, it's subtle, but
Yeah.
you can see it. It's
It
really
makes
pretty.
it so each of these are a set of analogous colors that works all the way through there.
That's right, they are.
So-
And see, and this doesn't look like it would be, but when you look here on the color chart,
Yeah, it makes it interesting. And so the color chart will just give you a reminder, I think, of a lot of different color combinations that you can use.
I think it would be really nice to have it sitting in front of you too, so you refer to it when you kind of get stuck for ideas.
Great idea.
Okay, what do you have next?
let's talk about composition. Basically, it's just the way you combine the different elements that we've been talking about. So you might start out just stamping something in the middle of the card, and it's a very simple and can be an elegant look, and you have a lot of white space around it, which you might call the negative space, but it gives an interesting design that way, and this one would be similar. You can also, when something is symmetrical, it refers to a perfect balance of the image. So if I were to take a card and cover up half of it, you'd see that this half mirrors the other half.
Yes, it does. Okay.
And so that's a balance type design that you can use. And this one looks a little bit stiff. It's so controlled. If you vary it a little bit, it may still be considered symmetrical. But now on this one, you can see how the white space becomes a lot more interesting shape, and you go off the edges a little bit, and it becomes a lot nicer design.
Exactly, and that's very interesting with two basically the same designs. You just created them just a little bit differently for a whole new look.
Yeah, so don't be afraid of going off, you know, the edges and doing some different things with that. And some other symmetrical patterns that you can do that are going to look very different with every different stamp you select. But here's some things where, again, I'm just doing things in rows, and they're all straight and even.
Right.
But by leaving some nice white space, you've created a very interesting pattern on there. And you can add border designs, or you can turn the whole thing at an angle and make a more interesting pattern that way.
Boy, this is really interesting how you just, you know, put maybe like you stamped 4 times across, and the white space on here gives that card a very unique look.
Yeah, very simple, but a nice style. And also, you can go from doing things in rows to making more of a circular pattern, and you'll discover patterns with each different stamp, and turn them different ways, and keep playing with one to discover the patterns it makes before you move on to another one.
Right.
And you'll learn the most about your different stamps that way. Another circular patterning that you can do is what is called a radial. And
this looks like it'd be hard to do.
Well, basically, if you start from the middle, here's a card where I just did a dozen roses on here, and I was just working off of a stamp pad. But the idea that will help is if you think of it like a clock.
Great idea.
So if you started at 12 o'clock and then stamped at 3, 6, and 9, it would help you get your parameters and keep the circle idea going. You can come back if you wanted to change colors then on 1, 4, 7 or something. You'd know exactly where you were on the color changes.
I know that when I tried to do this before, I ended up with a square in the middle.
Yeah.
So you're laughing. I know, it looks funny,
actually,
but this is a good idea.
Yeah, and every different design, you know, stamp design will give you a different radial pattern. And so some of these I just discovered, like this one here,
Isn't that
I did
pretty?
5, and it creates a pentagon shape in there.
And a star in the center. Look at that.
Right, there's your negative space.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, you're professional already.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it. Now, what is the stamp on this one? Is it just this flower?
It's just the one little violet.
Oh my gosh. Now look at what one stamp created. It's unbelievable.
And here's your change of colors and values. Make it look different every time.
You combined all of those elements into one. That's beautiful.
A lot of the word stamps create very interesting patterns that just become an abstract pattern. It doesn't look like the word anymore. Maybe you can barely read that says hooray in there, but this one almost created a pinwheel.
Now most people would probably be afraid to do that because they don't want to ruin the word because you wouldn't be able to read it. But in this case, it's a very interesting design, yet you can still tell what it says.
And if you're studying the pattern of a design, play with it on scrap paper, just off of a stamp pad so that it's quick, and keep turning it different ways and experiment with it that way.
That's a good
This
idea.
one stamp here is so versatile. I was playing with it as an example of how many different ways could I use that one image. And if you do it in reds and greens, it looks like the folk Christmas tree that we call it.
Right.
But if you do it in pink, now it just looks like a filigree pattern, for example. So I did a sheet like this just to show you the range of all the different ways of doing things, whether the point is turned in or out. and the shapes it creates
and,
this
and
way.
there's that negative space in there again.
Yeah,
Now this is all
yeah.
one stamp.
All one stamp. Now
Unbelievable.
if I take the point and turn it in, I get an entirely different pattern. So,
Wow, that is really gorgeous.
so that'll give you a lot of different ideas where you'll get mileage
Out of one
your
single
stamps
stamp, I'll
like
say.
that. Okay. Now so far most of these are based on the symmetrical idea, where something is centered and all of that. The other thing that you would call asymmetrical is where it seems off balance. You may have the designs in this area, but other times you might balance the flowers in one area with a message, and it still creates a different kind of balance.
Right.
This is another idea here or here.
Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Now you just kind of pick a corner basically, or it doesn't even have to be in a corner. You can maybe put it off center.
Right, and this looks like your picture continues beyond the scope of your card, which makes it interesting. And sometimes you're working with a pattern and you've discovered an interesting pattern of sorts, like I was talking about with the roses. I just kept going
Right.
to where I covered all of the edges. And sometimes that just gets to looking busy unless you create a focal point. So look at the difference between this and the way I colored it in. Now I've created something that your eye will go to immediately.
Wow.
Right on the card.
And this is basically the same design. I mean, you just stamped one.
If you look closely, you can see that the roses are in there. It's exactly the same pattern in there. In the same way, this was all pinks, and I went in and colored in this area.
With your markers, you went in and
Upside
did
down.
that, right?
And this one here, if you run out of ideas, do a repeat pattern with the attention on
Oh.
one of them.
That's an interesting idea.
Right. And on this one, it's very busy and there's layers of pattern. But because most of these colors are all monochromatic, sticking to the blues,
Right.
your eye will go to the bright colors on the flowers.
Mm,
So that gives you some interesting things for focal point.
great ideas.
Other ways that you can create an illusion of movement are actually to take a stamp. Let's try this here. And I've got the little porpoise stamp here, and I'm going to stamp it on the pad. And when I put it down on the paper, before I lift it, I'm going to pull it. And that'll create a look of movement, like the water's dripping off of
Yes,
it and
it
it's
looks like
coming
he's-
up out of the water.
Exactly.
And so that will be another way that you can create some color. Or this one here, it looks like horse races.
Yeah, it
or
looks like
something
they're
where
in
really
motion.
going fast. And some other ones here where they're ice skaters or racing or something
That is a
on there.
great idea.
So that gives you some movement ideas. And other times you're making cards, your design is going to be based more on a realistic or scenic kind of thing, like we did with the garden card. And so these are all some examples of that, where you don't really stop and think about it. You know, the sky and the clouds are up here and the grass down here.
Right.
And you kind of just
Take
do
it for
because
granted
that's what you're used to seeing.
Exactly.
So that gives you some scenic ideas that you can do. And so that
these are
takes
really
us through, a whole scope of different composition ideas that will just push you to try some things you maybe hadn't thought of before.
Get that brain in motion, right?
Yeah. Seeing and stamping, right?
That's right. We've proved that here, haven't we?
Yeah.
Understanding the elements of line, shape, value, color, and composition will inspire your stamping creativity. Combining these concepts will allow you to explore exciting new possibilities and help you design even more beautiful and elegant stamped artwork.